One of the most isolating aspects of motivational crisis is the feeling that you're the only one going through this experience. Social media feeds showcase endless success stories, productivity tips, and inspirational quotes that can make your own struggle feel like a personal failing. But the truth is that you are part of a vast ecosystem of transformation that's happening all around you. Millions of people are experiencing some version of this motivational crisis, this spiritual awakening disguised as personal failure. We're living through what cultural historian Thomas Berry called the Great Turning, a collective transition from an industrial growth society to a life-sustaining civilization. This shift is happening not just in external systems, but in human consciousness itself. Your individual journey through the dark night of the soul is part of this larger evolutionary process. The old ways of being human, the patterns of endless consumption, achievement-based worth, and disconnection from our deeper nature are dying. And like all deaths, this process is often uncomfortable, disorienting, and filled with grief for what's being lost. But what's being born is extraordinary. A way of being human that's more connected, more sustainable, more aligned with both our deepest nature and the needs of our planet. You are not just healing your own relationship with motivation and meaning, you are participating in the healing of our collective human story. This ecological perspective can bring tremendous comfort during the difficult phases of transformation. When you understand that your crisis is part of a larger pattern, it becomes less personal and more universal. You're not broken. You're sensitive enough to feel the strain of old systems that no longer serve life. You're not behind. You're actually ahead of the curve, sensing changes that others haven't yet registered. Indigenous wisdom keepers have long understood that individual healing and collective healing are inseparable. When you do the work of integrating your shadow, honoring your authentic nature, and living from soul rather than ego, you contribute to the healing of the whole. Your personal transformation ripples out into your family, your community, your culture, and ultimately the entire web of life. This is why it's so important to find and create communities of others who are making this journey. People who understand that the breakdown is actually a breakthrough, who can hold space for the messy middle parts of transformation, who can reflect back your essential worth when you've forgotten it yourself. These communities might form around shared interests, spiritual practices, creative pursuits, or simply the common experience of being human in times of great change. What matters is finding places where you can be seen and accepted in your full complexity, where your questions are honored even when there are no easy answers, where the full spectrum of human experience, including the difficult parts, is welcomed as sacred. Picture this. You wake up, and the day stretches before you like an endless gray horizon. Your phone buzzes with notifications, urgent emails, social media updates, reminders of things you're supposed to care about. But when you reach for that familiar spark, that driving force that once propelled you through challenges and toward dreams, you find nothing, not even resistance, just a profound, aching emptiness where your motivation used to live. You sit on the edge of your bed, and for a moment, you wonder if something is fundamentally broken inside you. The voice in your head whispers its familiar criticism. Everyone else seems to have it figured out. Everyone else is hustling, grinding, manifesting their best life. What's wrong with you? But what if I told you that this moment, this precise experience of motivational emptiness, is not a failure at all? What if it's actually the most sacred threshold you could possibly cross? We live in a culture that worships at the altar of endless momentum. Our mythology tells us that we should always be moving upward, forward, faster. We've been sold the story that motivation is something we should be able to summon on command, like ordering coffee from an app. We've confused motion with meaning, productivity with purpose, achievement with aliveness. This cultural trance runs so deep that when our natural rhythms slow down, when our souls require rest or recalibration, we pathologize the pause. We turn what the ancients understood as necessary seasons of dormancy into personal failings. We've forgotten that even the earth lies fallow between harvests. The modern world has created what we might call motivational fundamentalism, a rigid belief system that equates human worth with constant output, perpetual growth, and measurable progress. This fundamentalism is preached from every corner: social media feeds showcasing endless productivity hacks, self-help gurus promising to unlock your unlimited potential, corporate cultures that reward burnout as dedication, and educational systems that measure learning by standardized metrics rather than genuine understanding. Under this relentless pressure, we've learned to distrust our own natural rhythms. We've been taught to override our body's signals for rest, to push through emotional exhaustion, to treat our inner landscape like a machine that should run at optimal efficiency 24/7. We've internalized the belief that if we're not constantly climbing some ladder of success, we're falling behind in the great race of life. But what if this entire framework is not just wrong, but actively harmful to our deepest well-being? What if the very pursuit of constant motivation is what's depleting our souls and leaving us feeling empty despite our achievements? Your lack of motivation isn't a bug in your system, it's a feature. It's your psyche's way of saying, stop, something needs attention here, something is ready to change. It's your inner wisdom rebelling against a way of living that has become unsustainable, calling you back to something more authentic and alive. In the archetypal journey that Carl Jung mapped so brilliantly, there comes a moment when the hero must leave the familiar path and enter what Dante called the dark wood, that place where the straight way is lost. This isn't punishment, it's initiation. Your motivational crisis is your entrance into the dark wood. Like the Hermit card in the tarot, you find yourself carrying only a small lantern in vast darkness, forced to slow down, to feel your way forward step by careful step. The old maps no longer work. The old rewards no longer satisfy. The old version of yourself, the one who could get excited about external achievements and social validation, has begun to dissolve. This dissolution feels like death, because in a very real sense it is. Not physical death, but what Jung called the death of the ego, the false self that has been performing, striving, and seeking approval. This false self has served you well, protected you, helped you navigate the world. But there comes a time when its strategies become prisons, when its motivations feel hollow, when its very success begins to taste like ash in your mouth. Consider the caterpillar entering the chrysalis. From the outside, this looks like stagnation, like a complete cessation of progress. The caterpillar has stopped moving, stopped eating, stopped growing in the way it always had. If caterpillars had therapists, this one would probably be diagnosed with severe motivational dysfunction. But inside that seemingly inert chrysalis, the most profound transformation in nature is taking place. The caterpillar's body is literally dissolving into what scientists call imaginal soup, a primordial state where the old form completely breaks down so that something entirely new can emerge. This is what's happening to you right now. Your old motivational structures are dissolving because they were built for a version of yourself that you're outgrowing. The goals that once excited you feel meaningless because they were serving needs you no longer have. The achievements that once brought satisfaction now feel empty because you're no longer the same person who set those goals in the first place. This isn't regression, it's metamorphosis. Jung spoke extensively about the shadow, those parts of ourselves we've denied, rejected, or hidden away. Our culture's obsession with constant motivation often serves as a defense against encountering our shadow. We stay busy, stay driven, stay focused on external goals, partly because stopping would mean facing what we've been running from. But the shadow isn't just our personal darkness. It includes what Jung called the golden shadow, the parts of ourselves we've deemed too powerful, too creative, too authentic to be safely expressed. Often, our relentless motivation has been a way of avoiding not just our pain, but our deepest gifts and truest calling. Consider this possibility. What if your exhaustion isn't just from trying too hard, but from trying to be someone you're not? What if your motivational burnout is actually your authentic self staging a revolt against a life that doesn't fit? What if the emptiness you feel is your soul's way of clearing space for something more genuine to emerge? Your motivation crisis might be your shadow's way of finally getting your attention. Perhaps beneath all that driving ambition was a deep fear of not being enough. Perhaps behind all that goal setting was a terror of sitting still long enough to feel your own pain. Perhaps your achievements were elaborate ways of avoiding the deeper questions. Who am I when I'm not performing? What do I actually want versus what I think I should want? What would I choose if I weren't afraid? But there's another layer to explore. What dreams did you abandon because they seemed impractical? What parts of yourself did you suppress because they didn't fit the mold of who you thought you should be? What authentic desires have you been denying because they might disappoint others or disrupt the life you've built? The absence of motivation creates space for these shadow questions to emerge, both the dark ones we've been avoiding and the golden ones we've been denying. It's uncomfortable because we've been trained to fear our own depths, both the painful and the powerful. We've been taught that our worth comes from our output, our value from our achievements. But your soul is calling you to discover the radical truth that you are inherently worthy, not because of what you do, but because of what you are. This recognition can be both liberating and terrifying. If your worth isn't dependent on your achievements, then who are you? If your identity isn't built on your productivity, then what defines you? These questions thrust you into what existential philosophers call the anxiety of freedom, the uncomfortable realization that you are far more free to choose your life than you've been pretending. One of the most profound aspects of motivational crisis is how it forces us to separate authentic desires from conditioned responses. For perhaps the first time in years, you're not being driven by external pressures, social expectations, or unconscious programming. You're in a space of genuine choice, which can feel terrifying when you've been on autopilot for so long. This is what spiritual traditions call discernment, the ability to distinguish between the soul's true calling and the ego's manufactured wants. The ego desires are often loud, urgent, comparative. They sound like, I should be making more money. I need to find my passion. I have to figure out my purpose. Everyone else is ahead of me. Soul desires, by contrast, are often quiet, patient, and deeply personal. They might whisper, I want to feel connected to myself. I long for work that feeds my spirit. I need time to heal. I want to create something beautiful. I yearn for authentic relationships. But learning to hear these soul whispers requires developing what the mystics call the ear of the heart, a quality of listening that goes beyond mental analysis. It requires stillness, patience, and the willingness to sit with uncertainty. In our hyper-connected world, this kind of deep listening has become a lost art. The motivational crisis creates the perfect conditions for rediscovering this ancient skill. When the external noise of ambition quiets down, when the urgent demands of achievement fade, a spaciousness opens up. In this spaciousness, you can begin to sense what truly calls to you, not from obligation or expectation, but from genuine resonance. This process often involves what spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body, the accumulated emotional pain that we carry from past experiences. Much of our driven behavior has been an unconscious attempt to avoid feeling this pain. But authentic healing requires turning toward it with compassion, allowing it to be witnessed and integrated rather than bypassed through busyness. Your motivational emptiness is actually creating the space for you to hear these quieter voices, these more authentic longings. But you have to be willing to sit in the discomfort of not knowing, not rushing to fill the emptiness with the first thing that presents itself. This requires developing what Buddhist teacher Pema Chödrön calls the courage to stay, the ability to remain present with difficult experiences without immediately trying to escape or fix them. As you learn to discern between soul desires and ego demands, you might discover that many of your previous goals were actually borrowed from others: parents, society, peer groups, cultural conditioning. You might realize that you've been living someone else's definition of success, someone else's version of the good life. This recognition can be simultaneously liberating and disorienting, like discovering you've been wearing clothes that never quite fit. Here, we must address a crucial danger: spiritual bypassing. As you begin to understand your motivational crisis as a spiritual awakening rather than a personal failure, there's a temptation to turn even this realization into another form of performance. You might find yourself trying to be good at having a spiritual awakening, comparing your transformation to others, or rushing to the healing part without fully honoring the breaking down part. True spiritual awakening isn't another achievement to unlock or another identity to perform. It's not about becoming a more enlightened version of your achieving self. It's about discovering what remains when all the performing stops and having the courage to build a life from that foundation. The motivational crisis isn't something to be fixed or bypassed. It's something to be inhabited fully with presence and compassion. The goal isn't to find new motivation as quickly as possible. It's to discover what authentic aliveness feels like beneath all the manufactured urgency.
Agriculture teaches us something our achievement-obsessed culture has forgotten: the absolute necessity of fallow periods. A field that produces crops year after year without rest will eventually become depleted, unable to support healthy growth. The fallow period isn't wasted time. It's when the soil regenerates, when nutrients are restored, when the conditions for future abundance are being prepared. Your psyche operates on similar principles. The periods of apparent inactivity, the seasons when old motivations have died but new ones haven't yet been born, are when your soul is composting old experiences, integrating lessons, and preparing ground for whatever wants to emerge next. This requires a fundamental shift in how we relate to productivity. Instead of measuring worth by output, we begin to recognize the profound productivity of emptiness, the generative power of not knowing, the creative potential of uncomfortable pauses. One of the most important skills you can develop during this period is what contemplative traditions call witnessing consciousness, the ability to observe your experience without immediately trying to change it, fix it, or escape from it. Most of us have very little practice with simply being present to difficult emotions or uncomfortable states. Our default response to the absence of motivation is to panic and immediately start trying strategies to get it back. New goals, new routines, new inspirational content, new self-improvement approaches. But what if, instead of trying to solve the problem of no motivation, you got curious about it? What if you approached it the way a naturalist might observe a rare bird, with patience, attention, and respect for its mysterious nature? This isn't passive resignation. This is active presence. It's the difference between being a victim of your experience and being the conscious witness of it. From the witnessing perspective, you can begin to notice patterns, to sense what wants to emerge, to respond rather than merely react. The practice of witnessing requires developing what Buddhism calls beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh eyes, without the burden of preconceptions about how things should be. When you can look at your motivational emptiness with beginner's mind, you might discover that it contains its own form of intelligence, its own teaching, its own gift. This witnessing consciousness is not detached or cold. It's actually deeply compassionate, the same quality of presence you might offer to a frightened child or a suffering friend. You're learning to be that kind of friend to yourself, especially to the parts of yourself that are confused, tired, or lost. As you develop this capacity, you begin to notice the subtle violence of constantly trying to be different than you are. You see how much energy you've been spending fighting reality, arguing with what is, trying to force yourself into states that aren't naturally arising. This recognition often brings tremendous relief, not because your problems are solved, but because you stop making them worse through resistance.
The witnessing perspective also allows you to see the inherent intelligence in your psychological processes. Your lack of motivation isn't random or pathological. It's a precise response to specific conditions in your life. Perhaps you're motivationally empty because you've been pouring your energy into projects that don't align with your values. Perhaps you're exhausted because you've been trying to be someone you're not. Perhaps you're uninspired because you've been following paths that lead away from your authentic self. From this place of compassionate witnessing, you can begin to ask different questions. Instead of, "What's wrong with me?" you might wonder, "What is this experience trying to show me?" Instead of, "How do I fix this?" you might ask, "What wants to emerge from this emptiness?" Instead of, "When will this end?" you might inquire, "What is this teaching me about how I want to live?" Instead of asking, "How do I get my motivation back?" try sitting with these deeper inquiries. What was I really seeking through all that striving? What need was my ambition trying to meet? What fear was my busyness helping me avoid? If I couldn't fail, what would I choose to do with my life? What would I create if no one would ever see it? What brings me alive in ways that have nothing to do with achievement or recognition? Who am I when I'm not performing, not producing, not trying to prove my worth? What do I actually enjoy, separate from what I think I should enjoy? What does my body want? What does my heart long for when it thinks no one is listening? If I had permission to disappoint everyone, my family, my culture, my younger self, what would I choose? What old dreams am I still carrying that no longer fit who I've become? What new dreams am I afraid to admit even to myself? These questions don't have easy answers, and that's precisely the point. They're meant to be lived with, carried like seeds in the dark soil of uncertainty, allowed to germinate in their own timing. But there are additional layers to explore. What if the life I've been working toward isn't actually the life I want? What if my exhaustion comes not from working too hard, but from working against my own grain? What if the goals I've been pursuing belong to a version of myself I've outgrown? Consider these deeper inquiries. What did I love to do as a child, before the world told me what was practical or profitable? What activities make me lose track of time? What conversations energize me rather than drain me? When do I feel most like myself, not the self I present to the world, but the self I am when no one is watching? What would I attempt if I knew I couldn't fail? What would I create if success and failure were irrelevant? What would I choose if money were no object? What would I do if I had only 1 year to live? These questions cut through the layers of conditioning and conditioning to reveal what mystic poet Rumi called the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need. There's also the question of legacy, but not in the way we usually think about it. Not, what will people remember about me, but what qualities do I want to embody while I'm here? What kind of energy do I want to bring to my interactions? How do I want people to feel when they're in my presence? And perhaps most importantly, what would love do? Not romantic love, but the deeper love that connects us to life itself. What would that love choose in this moment? What would it say no to? What would it say yes to? What would it create, heal, or serve?
Here's what most people don't understand about the journey through motivational crisis. You don't get your old motivation back. That would be like expecting a butterfly to return to being a caterpillar. What emerges on the other side is something entirely different. Not motivation in the old sense, but what we might call authentic aliveness. This new form of engagement with life doesn't depend on external validation or future promises. It arises from alignment between your actions and your deepest values, from work that feels like an expression of your soul rather than a betrayal of it, from relationships that honor your authentic self rather than your performed persona. This authentic aliveness operates on completely different principles than manufactured motivation. Where old motivation was often fueled by scarcity, I must achieve this before it's too late, authentic aliveness flows from abundance. There is enough time for what truly matters. Where old motivation was comparative, I must be better than others, authentic aliveness is collaborative. How can my gifts serve the whole? Where old motivation was fear-based, what if I fail? Authentic aliveness is love-based. What wants to be born through me? This transformation often brings what Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency for things to turn into their opposite. The person who was once driven by external achievement becomes motivated by inner development. The workaholic discovers the productivity of rest. The people-pleaser learns the generosity of boundaries. The perfectionist finds freedom in embracing flaws. This authentic aliveness might look quieter than your old motivation. It might move more slowly, choose more carefully, say no more often. It might prioritize depth over speed, meaning over metrics, being over becoming. To the outside world, it might even look like less ambition. But those who have made this journey know it's actually the most powerful force in the universe, a life lived from the inside out. When you act from this place of authentic aliveness, your work becomes less about personal advancement and more about contribution. You're no longer trying to extract value from the world to fill an inner void. Instead, you're offering your unique gifts as a natural expression of who you are. This shift from extraction to expression changes everything. The quality of your presence transforms as well. Where once you might have been anxious about outcomes, now you can be more present to the process. Where once you might have been focused on impressing others, now you can concentrate on serving them. Where once you might have been driven by proving your worth, now you can rest in knowing your inherent value. This doesn't mean you become passive or lose your edge. If anything, you become more powerful because your actions are aligned with your deepest truth rather than divided against themselves. You waste less energy on internal conflicts, on trying to be someone you're not, on pursuing goals that don't actually matter to you.
Modern neuroscience is confirming what mystics have long known. Profound personal transformation literally rewires the brain. When you move through a motivational crisis, you're not just changing your thoughts, you're changing the neural pathways that generate those thoughts. The brain has what scientists call neuroplasticity, the ability to form new neural connections throughout life. During periods of uncertainty and breakdown, this plasticity increases dramatically. Your brain is essentially preparing itself for new patterns of thinking, feeling, and being. What feels like confusion is actually reorganization happening at the cellular level. Dr. Rick Hansen, a neuropsychologist who studies contemplative practices, explains that our brains have a negativity bias. They're wired to notice and remember threats more readily than opportunities. This served our ancestors well when survival was uncertain, but in modern life, it often keeps us trapped in cycles of anxiety and driven behavior. The motivational crisis creates space for this bias to recalibrate. When you stop running from discomfort and learn to be present with uncertainty, you literally strengthen the neural networks associated with resilience, creativity, and inner peace. You're not just changing your mindset, you're changing your mind itself. Polyvagal theory, developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, helps explain why rest and reflection feel so foreign to many of us. Our nervous systems have learned to operate primarily from states of activation, either the sympathetic fight-or-flight response or the dorsal vagal freeze response. We've lost access to what Porges calls the social engagement system, the ventral vagal state that allows for calm connection, creative thinking, and authentic expression. The period of motivational emptiness often corresponds to a nervous system that's been stuck in chronic activation finally beginning to downregulate. This is why the early stages of this journey can feel so uncomfortable. Your system is literally learning how to be calm, perhaps for the first time in years. Understanding this neurobiological dimension can bring tremendous compassion to your process. Your struggles aren't moral failings or character defects. They're the natural result of a nervous system that's been overstimulated and is now learning to find its natural rhythm again. The hero's journey doesn't end with personal transformation. It completes when the hero returns to the community with gifts from the underworld. Your journey through motivational crisis isn't ultimately about you alone. It's about what you'll bring back to a world desperately in need of people who have remembered how to be authentically alive. As you begin to re-engage with life from this new foundation, you become a living example of an alternative way of being. You show others that it's possible to be productive without being driven, successful without being compulsive, engaged without being addicted to achievement. Your work, whatever form it takes, becomes less about personal advancement and more about contribution. Your relationships become less about what you can get and more about what you can offer. Your presence becomes less about impressing others and more about blessing them with your authentic self. One of the most important aspects of this journey is recognizing that you're not alone in it. Millions of people are experiencing some version of this motivational crisis, this spiritual awakening disguised as personal failure. We're living through a collective dark night of the soul, a mass shedding of old paradigms that no longer serve our species or our planet. This is why it's so important to find and create communities of others who are making this journey. People who understand that the breakdown is actually a breakthrough, who can hold space for the messy middle parts of transformation, who can reflect back your essential worth when you've forgotten it yourself. These communities might form around shared interests, spiritual practices, creative pursuits, or simply the common experience of being human in times of great change. What matters is finding places where you can be seen and accepted in your full complexity, where your questions are honored even when there are no easy answers. As you move through and beyond the motivational crisis, you'll discover one of life's most beautiful paradoxes. The less you try to be motivated, the more genuinely motivated you become. The less you chase external validation, the more internally validated you feel. The less you perform your worth, the more worthy you know yourself to be. This doesn't mean becoming passive or disengaged. It means learning to act from overflow rather than emptiness, from fullness rather than hunger, from love rather than fear. It means discovering what the Taoists call Wu Wei, effortless action, doing without forcing, achieving without striving. When your actions arise from this place of authentic aliveness rather than manufactured motivation, they carry a different quality entirely. They feel sustainable rather than depleting, creative rather than compulsive, generous rather than grasping.
Just as the earth moves through natural cycles of growth and dormancy, your soul has its own seasons. There will be times of expansion and times of contraction, periods of abundant creativity and periods of necessary rest, seasons of external engagement and seasons of internal focus. Learning to honor these natural rhythms instead of fighting them is one of the great gifts of having moved through motivational crisis. You begin to trust that fallow periods aren't failures, but preparations, that slow seasons aren't setbacks, but recalibrations, that the absence of the old familiar drive might be making space for something entirely new to be born. This trust allows you to move through future challenges with much greater ease and wisdom. You no longer panic when motivation wanes because you understand it as a natural part of the cycle. You no longer judge yourself for needing rest because you know that rest is when integration happens. You no longer force yourself to care about things that don't genuinely matter to you because you've learned to distinguish between authentic engagement and performed enthusiasm. Understanding these soul seasons helps you recognize that what looks like stagnation from the outside might actually be deep underground growth. Just as trees do most of their growing in winter, expanding their root systems, strengthening their foundations, you too might be doing your most important development during periods when nothing visible is happening. The spring season of the soul brings new possibilities, fresh energy, and the courage to begin again. But it comes in its own timing, often after you've stopped looking for it. You might wake up one morning and notice that color has returned to the world, that activities that once felt forced now feel inviting, that you're curious about things again. Summer brings the fullness of expression, periods when your energy feels abundant, when you can give generously without depleting yourself, when your work feels like play and your relationships feel nourishing. These are the times to make hay while the sun shines, to create and contribute and celebrate. Autumn invites reflection and harvest, times to gather the lessons from your experiences, to appreciate how far you've come, to let go of what's no longer serving you. This is when you might find yourself naturally wanting to simplify, to focus on what's most essential, to prepare for the next phase of inward turning. And winter, winter, the season that our culture most fears and misunderstands. Winter is not death, it's gestation. It's when the deepest work happens, when transformation occurs in the darkness, when the soul prepares for its next expression. Learning to welcome winter seasons, both in nature and in your own life, is perhaps the greatest wisdom you can cultivate. Each season has its gifts, its teachings, its necessary contribution to the whole cycle. Trying to live in permanent spring or summer is like trying to have only day without night. It's not natural and it's not sustainable. The invitation is to learn to find beauty and purpose in each season, to receive the gifts that can only come in periods of apparent dormancy. One of the most challenging aspects of moving through motivational crisis is learning to trust what mystics call sacred timing, the recognition that transformation has its own rhythm, its own intelligence, its own perfect unfolding that can't be forced or hurried. Our culture worships speed and immediate results. We want to order transformation like we order food, quick, convenient, and exactly to our specifications. But the soul operates on geological time, not digital time. It measures progress in seasons, not seconds. It values depth over speed, integration over efficiency, wisdom over information. This creates what spiritual teacher Jeff Foster calls the beautiful mess, the gap between our desire for quick resolution and the soul's insistence on thorough transformation. Learning to inhabit this gap with grace is perhaps the most important skill you can develop during this period. Sacred timing means recognizing that some insights can only come after you've lived with certain questions for months or even years.
Some healing can only happen after you've developed enough inner stability to hold more complex truths. Some doors can only open after you've fully grieved what's behind the doors that have closed. This doesn't mean becoming passive or resigned. It means learning to distinguish between effortless effort and forcing, between inspired action and compulsive doing, between following your inner guidance and following your anxiety. It means developing what the Taoists call Wu Wei, acting in harmony with the natural flow of things rather than against it. Practically, this might mean allowing projects to unfold organically rather than forcing them to completion. It might mean giving relationships space to evolve rather than trying to control their direction. It might mean trusting that your next steps will become clear when you're ready to take them rather than demanding clarity before you've done the inner work to receive it. This trust in sacred timing often brings up what Jung called the anxiety of patience, the discomfort of not knowing when things will change, when clarity will come, when the next phase will begin. Our culture has conditioned us to believe that not knowing is dangerous, that uncertainty is a problem to be solved rather than a doorway to be walked through. But uncertainty is actually the natural state of growth. Every seed that becomes a tree, every caterpillar that becomes a butterfly, every person who becomes more fully themselves, all must pass through periods of not knowing, of existing in the space between no longer and not yet. Learning to find peace in this space is one of the great spiritual achievements. So here you are, in the midst of what might be the most important journey of your lifetime. The old motivations have fallen away, and the new ones haven't yet fully formed. You're in the liminal space, the threshold, the chrysalis, and it's exactly where you need to be. This is your invitation to stop trying to fix yourself and start getting curious about yourself. Stop trying to get back to who you were and start discovering who you're becoming. Stop judging the emptiness and start exploring what wants to fill it. Not with more of the same old pursuits, but with whatever is authentically calling to you from the depths of your being. Your lack of motivation isn't a problem to be solved. It's a teacher to be honored, a doorway to be walked through, a gift to be unwrapped slowly and with great reverence. It's your soul's way of saying, we're ready for the next level now. We're ready to live from truth instead of performance, from authenticity instead of approval, from love instead of fear. As you move forward on this journey, remember that transformation doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes the most profound changes happen in the smallest moments. Choosing to rest when you're tired instead of pushing through. Saying no to commitments that don't align with your values. Speaking truthfully about your experience instead of pretending everything is fine. The sacred reveals itself not only in mountaintop experiences, but in the ordinary moments when you choose authenticity over performance, presence over productivity, being over becoming. These seemingly small choices accumulate into a completely different way of living, one that honors the full spectrum of human experience, including the difficult and uncomfortable parts. Your daily life becomes your spiritual practice. Your work becomes your contribution to the healing of the world. Your relationships become opportunities to practice love in its most practical forms. Your challenges become teachers, your breakdowns become breakthroughs, and your periods of no motivation become doorways to discovering what genuine aliveness actually feels like. This journey through motivational crisis and into authentic aliveness isn't a one-time event with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's more like a spiral path that you'll walk many times throughout your life, each time at a deeper level, each time with greater wisdom and compassion for the process. There will be moments when you forget everything you've learned and fall back into old patterns of forcing, striving, and performing. This isn't regression, it's part of the spiral. Each time you remember and return to authenticity, you do so with greater understanding and less self-judgment.
The goal isn't to never again experience periods of confusion, emptiness, or lack of direction. The goal is to relate to these experiences differently, to see them as natural parts of the human journey, rather than personal failures, to approach them with curiosity rather than criticism, to trust the process even when you can't see where it's leading.
If you're in the midst of your own motivational crisis right now, if you're struggling with the emptiness where your drive used to be, if you're wondering what's wrong with you and when you'll feel normal again, please know this: you are not broken. You are not behind. You are not failing at life. You are exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you need to be doing, even if that's nothing at all. You are in the most sacred part of the human journey, the part where the old self dies and the new self is born, where everything you thought you knew gets composted into wisdom, where the life you were living transforms into the life you were meant to live. This process can't be rushed, can't be bypassed, can't be optimized or hacked. It unfolds in its own timing, according to its own mysterious logic. Your job isn't to figure it out or control it. Your job is to show up for it with as much presence, compassion, and trust as you can muster. The butterfly doesn't emerge from the chrysalis because it tries harder to be a butterfly. It emerges because it completely surrenders to the dissolution process, trusting that something new will be born from the primordial soup of its former self. You are in your chrysalis right now. Trust the process, trust the emptiness, trust the not knowing. Trust that whatever is seeking to be born through you will emerge in perfect timing, bringing gifts you can't even imagine from your current vantage point. This transformation you're undergoing, this movement from performed motivation to authentic aliveness, is not just personal. It's part of a larger shift happening in human consciousness, a collective awakening to more sustainable and soulful ways of being in the world. By sharing your experience, by speaking truthfully about your journey, by allowing others to witness your process, you contribute to this larger transformation. You help normalize the natural cycles of growth and rest, expansion and contraction, doing and being. You give others permission to honor their own rhythms, to trust their own process, to believe in the possibility of living from authenticity rather than performance. So I invite you to find your people, the others who are making this journey, who understand that breakdown can be breakthrough, who can hold space for the messy middle parts of transformation. Share your story, listen to theirs, create spaces where the full spectrum of human experience is welcomed and honored. Your journey through the absence of motivation is a gift not only to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch. By learning to live from authenticity instead of performance, you become a beacon of possibility, showing others that there is indeed another way to be human in this world. The sacred conversation continues, and your voice is an essential part of it. Welcome to the journey. Welcome to the transformation. Welcome to the discovery of who you truly are when all the performing stops and the real living begins. This is your time. This is your initiation. Trust the process and let yourself be born anew.